This is not financial advice. I'm recording my thoughts about Alphabet stock. It's currently trading at about $172. In this video, I'm going to cover its 2029 price target in the form of valuation. Previously, back in 2023, I made a video on Alphabet's 2027 valuation, in which I've said the stock price should be in between $175 to about $250, but it's already at $175 now in 2025. And the numbers have improved since my previous valuation. So I'm doing a revaluation for 2029. So let me now quickly give you a refresher on the business model and how Google makes its revenue. If you want to hear more details, please check my previous video. It's 12-minute duration, but it's going to give all the details. I'll leave the link in the comments below. As you can see on the screen, Google's revenue segments, there are multiple. Search business accounts for about 50% plus of their revenue. They report search and others together. And then there is Google Cloud, which is a standalone business segment. And there are other revenue segments like YouTube, Google Network, subscriptions, platforms, and devices. So if you have noticed my previous valuation, I group Google subscriptions, platform, devices, Google Ad Network, and YouTube together because they have very similar margins and similar growth rates. The search business, I treat it as a separate entity because it has its own margins and growth rate, and it's also in trouble because of ChatGPT, right? So I do valuation of search separately, and then Google Cloud separately, because Google Cloud is growing at a much faster rate than any of the other segments. So I will do three valuations and I will add them together to come up with the final price target for Google. So now let me go to the valuation. I'm going to show two cases. I'm going to show you the first case, in which I'm estimating $315 price target for Google in 2029. And based on the current price of $170, it's almost 80 to 90% gain in 5 years, which is very attractive. So let me give you my assumptions. As you can see on the screen, for Google search in 2024, they made about $185 billion of revenue. And I'm estimating 0% growth rate because a lot of people are worried about search business being in trouble because of generative AI. So I'm assuming that it's not going to grow at all. In reality, it did grow since the advent of ChatGPT. When ChatGPT was released, Google was making $160 billion of revenue in search business. It actually grew by about $25 billion in 2 years, right? So it's growing, but I'm estimating 0% growth. And when I look at 0% growth, it's not actually flat growth. It's actually a decelerating because the search business itself is growing at about 10% year over year. And Google, being the leader, will have to grow at even faster rate than 10%. But since there are threats from generative AI, which are yet to be proven, I'm estimating 0%. So think of this 0% as deceleration in the search business. Okay. So I'm putting 25% net profit margin based on their gross margin for search business. And I'm only assigning a 20 multiple. Business like this with huge moat should get much higher multiple, but I'm only assigning 20, with which the search business would be worth about $925 billion by 2029. And currently they have 12.19 billion outstanding shares. When I did the video back in 2023, they had 12.9 billion. So they actually bought about 700 million shares back in the past 2 years. So I'm assuming 3.5% buyback because Google makes a lot of profit and they cannot do much with it, because if they want to acquire some business, the Department of Justice will just stop it because of the monopoly laws, right? So they have no choice but to buy back stock. That's their way of giving the earnings back to the investors. Of course, they also pay a little bit of dividend, if I'm not mistaken. So I'm estimating 10.2 billion outstanding shares by 2029. So that gives me $91 stock price for search business in 2029. And let me show you Google Network, YouTube, Google Other. They made about $125 billion of revenue here. I'm estimating 10% growth rate because they are growing in a similar rate. and YouTube, as you know, is growing very fast, right? And Google network and Google other are also growing in the double digits. So I'm putting 10%, with which they'll make about $200 billion of revenue for these three segments together in 2029. And I'm estimating 25% net profit margin, with which they will make about $50 billion of net income in 2029. They deserve a higher multiple than 25, but I'm still assigning 25. With that, they'll be worth about $1.25 trillion by 2029, and that converts to $123 stock price for Google Network, YouTube, and Google Other. Other will include the devices, subscription, and all that, right? Now let me go to the Google Cloud, which is the hardest business for Google. 2024, they made about $43 billion and growing at about 30% in the most recent quarter. But I'm estimating 20% growth rate because Google Cloud has a disadvantage when compared to Azure and AWS, which are already big, and switching costs are very expensive for the companies that already have Azure and AWS, and they're already good, right? So that's why I'm estimating 20% growth rate, even though Google Cloud is still small compared to their peers. I'm estimating $100 billion of revenue by 2029 for Google Cloud and 25% net profit margin, and I'm assigning 35 multiple. It can get 40, but I'm only assigning 35, with which Google Cloud would be worth about $936 billion by 2029, and that will convert to $92 stock price for Google Cloud. Now let me show you the cash and cash equivalents. Currently they have 95 billion, and as shareholders we own a piece of that, right? So when I divide the $95 billion of cash with 10.2 billion outstanding shares, I get a stock price of $9, which is equivalent to the cash per share. Now I put all of these four things together to get $315 stock price, and I think I'm being a bit conservative here, but $315 is my price target for 2029, and based on the current price of $170 $72, it's about 80 to 90% gain, which is very attractive. And let me show you another case where Google search is going to grow at 5%, and search market is growing at double digit, right? But even 5% is not that great. Okay, I kept everything else the same, so this will convert to $340 stock price for Google in 2029 if their search business grows in the low single digit percentage. So based on the current price of $170, this is almost a 2x in 5 years. In conclusion, I'm looking at a $315 stock price for Google in 2029 in the case where the search business becomes stagnant, and in the case where search business grows at 5% year over year, the stock price would be $340 by 2029. So based on these price targets, I'm a buyer of Google at $170. Again, this is not financial advice. Please don't treat this as financial advice and buy the stock. In full disclosure, I do own Google shares at about $109 stock price, average price. So these are my thoughts. Please let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thank you so much for watching.